Why don't we turn the floor then over to Ivelisse, who teaches at Central Park East High School.
Hi, everyone. My internet is pretty stable, but my children's behavior is really not. So at any given moment, you might hear an 18-month-old running through the house screaming, Mama, Dada. So I'm just going to go ahead and apologize for that right now. I am going to share my screen because otherwise I will not be able to stay focused. That's how my brain works. So just give me 1 sec. I'm going to pull my screen up. I'm going to go into presentation mode here. And there. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So again, I'm Ivelisse Brannon. I teach at Central Park East High School. And I'm going to share a photo journal assignment that I am doing, well, that my students are doing. I want to say I'm doing it with them. The first thing I thought about, oopsie, for some reason it's not letting me, the first thing I thought about when we heard the schools were closing was that they were going to be closed for the rest of the year. I immediately had a sense that that was going to happen. And so my colleagues and I, scrambled to, put units together, or rather to cut units down, right? Because we knew that we'd have less time with the kids, less classroom time, less time in general, less face time. Also, we worried about how we would keep in touch with the kids. And so I put this journal assignment together for a number of reasons. One of them was I wanted to keep the kids writing. The other was that I wanted to keep in touch with them. I wanted to get a sense of how they were doing, like emotionally, their emotional well-being. I wanted to keep them conscious not only of what was happening like inside, like reflective, but also on the outside. And not only conscious of the bad things that were happening, but also of the good things that were happening. But I kind of felt validated when a week or two later, I saw this article in the Times about why you should keep a coronavirus diary. So another thing that in putting the assignment together, I also considered these 4 goals. And this is actually from some work done by Dr. Goldie Muhammad. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She just wrote a really great book called Cultivating Genius. So I also wanted to embed these 4 goals into the assignment. The assignment itself required students to just keep a journal, write in it 2 to 3 times a week. I told them there's no minimum or maximum word count, right? Like I didn't want them, I also told them like I wasn't going to be assessing their grammar. I told them that, I'm sorry about that, they should consider that this photo journal is a primary source document. They may want to share it with people in the future. They may want to share it with their family. They may want to share it with their own kids one day. So they should really put forth their best effort. But I didn't want them to worry about grammar and syntax and all of that. I told them to embed images, and I gave them a lot of latitude about what kind of images they wanted to use. They could use pictures of their family, pictures of things going on outside from their window, memes, GIFs, even TikToks. I had some kids create TikToks. And then I told them that 4 of their entries had to be grounded in something from the news that was connected either to them personally, like them, their family, their community. And I told them that did not have to be bad news. Lots of good things are happening in these terrible times. And so I wanted them to consider that as well. The assignment, by the way, is linked here where it says the assignment. So if you want to look at the full assignment, it's like a page long. It's much more detailed instructions, but I won't take you through that. I did also create my own journal. These are just some screenshots of the things that I put into my own journal. Pictures that I've taken of my children. This is my son Darcy here. He started his, he's writing the next great American novel in my workspace. This picture of me was actually a picture that a student took and put it in his journal. This is my youngest son in the corner, and some memes and some, screenshots from New York Times updates. I totally forgot to set my timer. I just realized. And these are some screenshots from the kids' journals. I was so impressed at how creative they were. I didn't tell them anything about format. I gave them no formatting requirements. I just kind of let them go. And I was really impressed at how invested they have been in. I'm still really impressed at their investment in this assignment, their attention to detail, their creativity. And my tips and takeaways are, if you want to do something like this, you should share a sample with the kids. There are some things obviously I can't write in my own journal because I'm sharing it with students. I can't put, I live in the suburbs, so I don't want to put pictures of my children doing, outdoor activities because I feel terrible for my kids who are stuck indoors. Offer an alternative, because some kids, many of our students, I know many of my students have experienced illness and loss, some of them multiple losses. And so I always tell them, you do not have to write about COVID. Like, you can just write about your own feelings, or you can give them an entirely different assignment. Leave an open-ended due date. I told my kids, don't click submit in classroom until I tell you to do so. And I don't ever respond on the journals, but I do if I see something that the kids, if I see that the kids are writing something, like if they're reading something, I email them, hey, I read that you're reading this and I read that, and they really like that. And that's what I got.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, let's open the floor. Let's open the floor for questions. So Eric, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead and pose your question.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting. I just had a quick question about monitoring student progress. Is this something that, it sounded like from what you were saying that you have the ability to see what students are doing in real time, or at least as they're working on it. Are they producing individual entries that you can see? Is it a much larger piece of work that then you have access to?
So every entry is on one doc, and I just kind of scroll through the doc. We use Google Classroom, so I've posted the assignment in Classroom, but I've told the kids not to submit. At some point, because it's taking me a really long time to go through them, I may just create another assignment like March through April, and then I may begin a May assignment. But I'm trying to limit the number of places that they're, where their journals are, so they have them all in one or two documents. But yes, I am monitoring.
Do students have the ability to look at each other's work?
No,
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, and I've also told them if they want to, there's something they don't want me to read, they can, just like black it out, and I won't read it. I will respect their privacy.
Thank you. Ina, you have a question.
Yes, thank you for sharing, and thank you for this opportunity for all of us to be together. I'm just concerned because I know for me, I have a student that is still struggling with technology and isn't often able to submit work or to join us whenever we do video meetings and things. And so I'm wondering, what do you do for a child like that?
So I do have some students who have very limited access to technology, and they've been they have the ability to write their journals out, and then they can take pictures of them and upload them to Classroom. Almost all of them have cell phones, or someone in their household has a cell phone, so they can do it that way. I'm very, very flexible. And just to go back to what Eric said, like I also don't, like I wrote, oh, you have to write 2 a week, but if they're not writing 2 a week, if they write 3 in 1 week and one week, I don't deduct points for that at all.
Excellent. Maureen, did you have a question?
I do. So I like that you're flexible with the deadlines because our students are dealing with so much right now. I'm wondering though, then how you are able to read and access and monitor their progress if they're not turning it in.
They don't have to turn it in at all, right? I just have access to the live document, and then I'm just kind of like tallying the entries. And that's really the extent of it. This is not like an assignment to assess mastery of skills. So I don't, I'm not super rigid on grading. I don't know if that answers your question.
Excellent. Well, that takes us, oh, yes, go ahead, Mackenzie.
I think this is a great idea, and I hope that our students at our school are having some kind of opportunity, whether it be an advisory to do this. I'm just, are you assigning like AP Lang work in addition to these journals, or because I'm like, we've been told at our school to like pare stuff down like by 25%. So I'm just worried that like, while this is probably a more important assignment to do, it's like hard to fit in with everything else we're supposed to be doing.
That's two things. Number one, we were told the same thing. So I actually started this assignment not with my AP students, with my mainstream ELA students, because they're doing the things they carried and actually dovetailed very nicely. For my AP students, this is not a requirement. It is it's optional. It's totally optional. But yes, it's given in addition to their, like the 11th grade students are doing the things they carry. They get work for that. And then, like I said, they only have to do it twice a week. And even if they don't do it twice a week, I really don't deduct points. And I tell them they can keep them super short.
Thank you so much, Ivelisse. So let's turn to Katelyn. And Katelyn, we hope you're back for good. And again, Katelyn teaches at Hunter College High School.
Okay, let's give this another whirl. So just to recap, epistolary response journal. So essentially what I did at the beginning of the semester is I put my students, these are seniors, but this could work across all grades, into groups of 4. And then I created for each group a Google folder. And essentially the mechanics of this are at the beginning of each week, one group member creates a document and they write a letter to their group mates in that document that somehow processes whatever reading or listening or watching. It's a cultural studies class, so we do all kinds of texts, but essentially the ethos of it is to have them really write to each other and not for pleasing the teacher, because that's a real motivation at the school where I teach. And as a result, I was getting a lot of sort of stilted, like tweed jacket style writing that wasn't fun to read. And so the point of this was to get them to write a little bit more authentically, to get them to take bigger risks, knowing that they were primarily writing for each other. I, of course, can pop into their folder at any time and read whatever they're writing. And so on Monday, a person in the group starts that week's conversation. And then by the end of that week, everybody in the group has to respond. And the conversation morphs pretty organically based on what we're talking about in class. Readings and texts have come up over the course of the week. And they can respond more than once. They can use the comment function. So this was all, oh, I'm getting an unstable message again. I'm stopping my video, but I'm gonna keep talking. This was all set up before we went to remote learning. But I feel really grateful that I set it up, because it was a seamless transition into remote learning, since they were doing their work sort of remotely outside of class already. The content of their letters has become so much more tender and vulnerable since they have been apart from each other. And a bunch of the students have told me that, like, having this space to both do rigorous academic thinking, but also to kind of check in with each other, has been valuable and has been sort of like a social lifeline. And essentially, so it's a really, really simple setup. And as Ivelisse and other folks have been discussing, the name of the game here is really like to scale way, way back. So I don't go in and write tons of comments in their letters. I just like pop my head in, you know, give a little nudging if I think they're saying something interesting, to like say, like, keep talking about that. That's really cool. But it has produced some of the best writing I've ever received from students, both pre and post apocalypse. And it's just much riskier writing. It is like they add in images, they put in memes, they put in links to videos that are relevant to what we're consuming. And it's just been working out really nicely. And I want to just give a little attribution to where I got the idea, because I feel like I would be plagiarizing if I didn't say it. There's a book that was published earlier this year called The Ferrante Letters, which is sort of a critical response to the Elena Ferrante Neapolitan Quartet by 4 different academic writers. And they posit in their introduction that they were getting really bogged down with like feeling trapped in the loneliness of their own academic pursuits. So they started writing these letters to each other as a way to kind of like break out of their individual specializations, and it worked for them. And so I think that like that spirit really carries over into this assignment with my seniors, and I'm about to start a new text with my juniors, and I'm absolutely going to put this into place for them. But yeah, I think that's the gist of it. I can take questions.
Dara asks if you can remind them of the title of the book. I believe you said The Ferrante Letters. Excellent.
Yes.
Good. Let's see. Sara, you have a question.
Yeah, Katelyn, it sounds like a really interesting project. I just wondered if you could just repeat, is it pretty much open in the beginning what the letter is about? You said it kind of circles back to pop culture themes. Do you put many restrictions on it in the beginning? I just wanted you to clarify that if you could.
Sure. So the class that I'm doing this in is an introduction to cultural studies with a focus on youth culture. So it's like representations of teenagers in various texts in literature, television, film, etc. So like we watch like The Breakfast Club, for example. So the letters have to be sort of critical, analytical responses to whatever the text is that they're reading that week or watching that week or whatever it is. So that's why I think that this is pretty malleable. Like you could literally do this for anything, and I think almost any subject.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Dara, would you like to jump in with your question?
Yes, I was just kind of to follow up what Sara just asked, what, for the first few letters, what requirements did you give them? I'm just trying to think, my students, I would have to kind of guide them in some way. Otherwise they just write kind of fluff letters to each other and just kind of go off course. What parameters did you give them when they write their letters to each other?
Yeah, so I have, so for the class, and maybe I'll add this into the folder as well, I have like a set of critical cultural studies questions that like I always ask them to turn back to in our class discussions, in their more formal writing, and I hold them to those questions in their letter writing also. So you're right, they can't just be like, I liked this or I didn't like this, you know, this bored me or this was fun. Like they have to, like for example, we just finished a unit on like the fictional high school, and so one group's letters were all about the figure of the nerd in the high school and sort of analyzing how the nerd is represented in various like directors and filmmakers and TV producers' imaginings of high school, and what like cultural impact that has and what might have produced that representation of the nerd. So they are really, they are quite analytical. And if I notice that they're not being analytical, if they are just saying like, that was fun or that was boring, I nudge them into, okay, like keep thinking about the why. But the one thing that I really wanted to avoid here was like micromanaging form. I really wanted them to to experiment with their voices and to talk to each other and write to each other as they might actually talk to each other and write to each other, and not necessarily with me in mind.
Sara, you want to jump in?
I just had one more quick question for you, Katelyn. So you said that the writing they produced from this assignment was some of the more, I think you said like vulnerable, and I just wondered, so using the cultural studies frame, how did that transition happen to this sort of more vulnerable writing? What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think part of it is they're all feeling just quite tender right now because they're seniors and they're sad about what's become of their senior year. And so that is certainly like that emotional experience is seeping into how they're reacting to, for example, watching a movie that has a prom scene or has a graduation scene or something like that. And I have really been encouraging them to try to find the intersection between like their emotional response to a thing and their intellectual response to a thing. And so I keep like nudging those questions along. And I think one of the things that I have been trying to do as a teacher is to maybe encourage that more, even in more formal academic writing. Like you're not just a brain in a jar, you are a person in the world. And like the academic writing that I like reading the most is writing that involves the actual writer and not just their synapses.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice. Any other questions for, oh yes, Rosie.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing this lesson, this activity idea. I think it's lovely. And I was wondering if you could share your class syllabus along with the other prompt question material in the Google Drive folder, because I would love to do this in social studies. And I think it's just fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, can definitely do that.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
So you said you nudged them sometimes towards being more analytical. So do you require them to use specific evidence, or do you kind of forego that just for the sake of it being a letter?
I always ask them, not to generalize. So if we're talking about a movie, I really want them to be writing about a specific scene and like the trappings of that scene. If it's a text, a particular passage from the text. So I tell them like when they feel like they're kind of flailing or in a hazy space, always to go back to the text, whatever the text is, and make sure that they're pointing to something specific in it that is creating that response. So yeah, I guess short answer, yes, I ask for evidence.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And with that, let's turn to our third presenter. Sorry about that. We'll come back, Caroline, to if your question remains unanswered, we'll come back to it in the at the very end of our session. And if I may ask, please use the little raise your hand function if you can. Since you're on more than one screen, I want to make sure that I notice when your hand is up. So let's turn to our third presenter. Timothy Ree is from Brooklyn Tech High School.
Hi, everyone. Wave if you can hear me and my audio is good. Okay. What's going on, Denny? Shout out. Hey, Sam. I see you flailing around. I just wanted to give you a little context in what I'm teaching and why I wanted to share a kind of a workshop model with you all. I teach at Brooklyn Tech and I teach seniors, and I have just the privilege of having 2 sections of creative writing where I could just explore, dip into a buffet of genres and have students follow me on that. The class is really workshop heavy. We don't have major exams or essays or anything like that, or analytical writing. More so we look at authors' styles, structure of a story, how drama works, how a script works, how poetry works. And we do a lot of emulation, and we do a lot of workshopping. And so I'm just a firm believer that the resources are in the room, that the students know what works, what doesn't work, with a little guidance and a little modeling at first. I teach at Brooklyn Tech, which is STEM heavy. And so a lot of these kids are going to be engineers and architects. And I'm just happy to have just maybe 60 kids who are just with me for 40 minutes, exploring poetry, let's say. And so I try to make it as fun as possible. In my class before the pandemic, there was a lot of peer review. And it usually happened in groups of 4 or 5. And I would have a kind of modeled workshop where I would provide some guiding questions and some guiding responses. And after setting that up in the beginning of the year, it turned really into a kind of autopilot where you could use this workshop model for all manner of genres. So I looked at some of your bios, and especially really interesting class descriptions, interdisciplinary Black studies, literacy and propaganda, women's voices, feminist literature. One of you teaches an intro to theater, and I think there was even production in that too. American Lit and the art of protest. And in all of these classes, I could imagine some sort of group activity that you do, and you kind of guide them, but you circle the room, and some groups are on task, some groups are, playing around, but they're doing it at their own pace. And so I was trying to figure out a way to possibly have the same spirit of a student-led workshop virtually. And of course, because I'm a kind of a control freak who poses not to be one, I really had a hesitation rolling this out. But what I realized is maybe a couple weeks into the pandemic, the workshop model is not just an academic tool or like a kind of a discussion tool. It actually, in a way, doubles as a kind of social emotional connection. And so I tried to smuggle in that kind of dynamic into some sort of workshop. So it really is a kind of excuse to keep in touch with everyone. So this particular lesson assumes a couple things. One, that a lot of students have the adequate technology, adequate Wi-Fi, internet, but it also assumes that teachers know how to use Zoom or Google Classroom. So if at any point, you have a question about that, that's just a disclaimer to begin. Really, this unit that I taught, I'm going to share a screen here. Here we go. The aim really was, how do we provide meaningful feedback on our script exercises? We're in this unit, we were in this unit in March on script writing, and I needed to move on to a Zoom procedure, and I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I'll go to maybe the main questions here. Setting up the Zoom reading, where students will contact each other and host their own meetings. And, they have to decide when they could all meet. Sometimes, at least the first couple of weeks, it was very difficult to have everyone on the same page. But after a couple tries of this, you have students who are master hosts now, right? They could do this, and they are able to kind of invite other people into their meetings as well. After this initial procedure, I found what's most important is a kind of talking points that I provide them with. And this is the only guidance I have for them. Broad enough to engender some sort of worthwhile discussion. So if you see here 1 through 5, how believable is the dialogue, let's say? How well paced is the dialogue? Is there any sense of surprise or revelation? Is there a sense of closure? And do you have any further questions for the group? And so this repeats for all of the participants. And at least on Zoom, there's a record option. Everyone arrives, and you could save it as an audio or a video version, and I only ask them to upload the audio version just to kind of keep facial anonymity and so on. And what they'll do is just post this onto our Google Classroom wall. And the beauty of this is you could listen to these maybe 7 or 8 videos, and everyone's included in that. And then students will listen to each other, and they'll also comment. And it builds this kind of creative aura and the spirit of revision that is not like a teacher-directed kind of constant vigilance on my part, but it turns out to be this really kind of boisterous, robust, informal, funny artifact, which doubles as a kind of timepiece, or what's the word I'm looking for? A time capsule for them to return to later on. And homework really is just to kind of post this, post your own, and then listen to some other group's table reading, and work on the revisions. And so, I don't know, I think that this, for me, has been at least a genre that's amenable to this kind of writing workshop model. But I could also imagine teachers doing this for all sorts of things, just daily check-ins, like or sharing, or if you have a poem or something like that, some sort of like student-led happy hour, or movie watching night, something like that. But with these guided questions, I find that students just kind of roll with that. The last thing I'll say is I uploaded maybe a 15-minute sample student Zoom writing workshop, and it's 2 people in there. There's supposed to be 4 people in there, but it's maybe apt that there's only 2, and the other 2 just had to do it on their own, and they need to improvise a little bit. But I found this recording to be particularly joyful, robust, inspiring, and also very critical at the same time, without my vigilance in that group. So that's all I got.
Thank you so much. Let's see, Marilyn, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was wondering if you have at your school any legal prescriptions about this. We're not allowed to have students record it all. I mean, at least, I'm not sure how it works with audio, but is that something that you've talked about with your school?
For sure. I mean, I think Eric and I, when we first met before everybody came, talked about Zoom being, as in terms of the DOE being restricted now because of Zoom bombers and so on. I hear great news that they're working with the union, and schools are considering bringing Zoom back, because the functions are so intuitive, so easy. And when I taught this, Zoom was not banned. But the other thing I'll say is, even, I think on Google Meets, correct me if I'm wrong, or even Microsoft Teams, there is a record option. I'm not sure if there are any others. But to that aspect, if students have a conference with each other and record that with each other, and I'm not present, there might be a kind of legal loophole there. So it's a kind of down low, sly, nerdy group activity that you record. But all I need is the audio. And I don't know, these bands, they come and go.
Denny, your hand is up. Jump in.
Tim, my man, you're an inspiring teacher. I love you. I have a quick question, just because a lot of what you're talking about with trust and norm building and all of that in terms of the writing workshop, that I think that's kind of bled into the amount of trust that the students put in one another. And I'm just curious as to how you establish that from the beginning. What resources do you have? What strategies you put into place to foster that sense of trust? Because I know for me, I work with all boys, and they typically are not as trusting from the outset, no matter how much I try to get them to realize that masculinity is, can be vulnerable. It is masculine to be vulnerable. I know one thing that I've run into with writing workshops for academic essays is students not taking criticism as a criticism of them, but really criticism of their work, because they often pair the two. And I'm curious to know what you've done in your work as a teacher to divorce a student's worth with their product, rather than just the fact that they're alive and should be known, valued, and loved because of that.
Yeah, I mean, you asked a lot, Denny. I think the main thing really is, how do you create relationships at the start of the year that allow anything like this to occur? I mean, the real assumption is that students trust each other to kind of share honest feedback. That's really, the question is, how do you foster that? From the beginning of the year, most of these writing workshops, I mean, these kids are masters at it now, but at the start, they were just very hesitant. And obviously teachers will have to, at least for me, I had to model all that at the very beginning. And even leading up to something like a Zoom recorded meeting, the thing that you saw, and I shared the screen with you all, that document is the second wave of the Zoom conferencing. The first wave was just like a quick, how you doing? It's like low stakes questions, and we saw how that went, and it's just like a slow rollout. And then on the back end, after you hear all these, it's more like which writing workshops really were the robust ones, which ones were the ones where students heard each other and were able to take criticism and moved and evolved to another place. And what I would do is just post. I would ask the students, this is great, can I post this? And that would be another assignment. Everybody listen to this, check this out. This is a workshop where it gets messy, and there's emotions. That's my work. I'm not going to change that word. Are you kidding me? But showing them how it's done in the beginning, modeling it, and then later on showing models of good ones. I guess that's the short answer to that.
Excellent. Eric, do you have a quick question?
I was just curious about the evolution of the assignment. Let's say I'm a student in your classroom and I produce something for a workshop. I then go into my Zoom meeting, I discuss it with my other students. Are you finding that the students are then modifying their work in accordance with these Zoom sessions, and the results are then improved?
Yeah, not always. Eric, to tell you the truth, I mean, it's sometimes you get a kid who writes something and then workshop it through Zoom and then submit the exact same thing. And I go, what was the purpose of that? So maybe the purpose is kind of the emotional connection with the students. But you're right, that is one of the holes here in terms of the balance between overvigilance. I remember Katelyn talking about, the idea of scaling back, really. And in this situation, it would be, I trust that some sort of change is made, and also the revision doesn't happen off screen too. They all have their Google documents open on the screen. And so they're really writing in real time while someone is giving feedback. And some students are like, no, don't do that. And then the student will just kind of write down a tentative revision. Now, all those are tracked changes, and those things are then posted onto the next, I guess, post Zoom workshop revision, and then they'll upload that. So, but again, I mean, I agree with Katelyn when you're talking about scaling back, even kind of overly commenting on something I think Ivelisse was saying this too, it kind of defeats the purpose of a student-led kind of joyous celebration of a kind of creativity. In this case, it was script writing. I really, if we were in the school right now and not in a pandemic, we would have already been swapping these scripts with the drama class, and those guys would be performing our plays, So it's a little challenging. But I hear you. I hear your. Sorry, somebody's FaceTiming me now. Can't do that.
Okay. Well, and thank you so much. It's